Nothing untoward other than I woke up in the middle of the night one day and I just caught my right elbow across my chest and just felt this lump. And I took that on board at about 4 in the morning. At the time I knew something. Instinctively, I knew something was wrong. And at that point, I kept it to myself. I didn't tell my husband or family. I needed to digest the news.
Now, you say you found a lump. Was there any, you said there were no symptoms at all. How did that lump feel? Was it a hard lump? Did it feel detached?
Sure, it just felt like sort of an acorn. It felt irregular in shape. Sometimes I think women do have symptoms and they know. It could be anything, it could be a rash. But in my case, it literally was the irregular lump.
And from there, what did you do? And how long did it take you to sort of seek some form of help?
I kept it to myself for 3 days. I had to sort of live with those 3 days knowing I wasn't being pessimistic, but I just felt it wasn't benign. It's though I knew that it was the breast cancer. And so therefore I probably just had to take that on board, digest it, process it. I told my husband, Chris, who said immediately go to the GP. They were fantastic. They saw me immediately and referred me to the NHS. But at that point, we wanted to fast track. So we went privately.
You were fast tracked through to the NHS and then you were given the news.
That was mind-blowing. I've written a lot of poetry and a lot of feelings about that time because the news just got worse. Instead of it getting better, I was in consultancy rooms and it was, yes, you've got triple negative and we can cure triple negative, which they could and they can. But it just seemed that my particular cancer, it was rare, it was aggressive, it was not going to be an easy road, and it hasn't been an easy road because of the high reoccurrence rate. This is the problem with this particular nasty cancer. It comes back, and when it does come back, I'll quote, it comes back in a vengeance.
So now we know your cancer has come back.
Yes.
And we know that you're at a hospice.
Sure.
And you're working to sort of enjoy your life.
And I'm having a lovely time.
So talk to me about that.
I'm having the most fantastic time. I have decided to embrace every day, and this is like, one would think, having a holiday. To me, it's having a peaceful holiday. The hospice is amazing. The staff are just like angels. And each day I bring something new to this, to the day. I bring in, it could be quotes, I'll bring in music, I'll bring art, I'll bring memories with my family, happiness, joy, because this is everything to me, this period of time. It's a gift.
But to know when you're told that you have a certain amount of time left, how does that feel? How do you get through things?
You accept it. The first thing, you accept it, and I think the second really important factor is you look at what you've done and you look at where you are and you look at how fulfilled as a person you are. And I feel I fit in all those categories. I've travelled, beautiful, beautiful family. My art has elevated to beyond my dreams. I mean, 5 years ago, I wouldn't have thought now it would have got to this level of recognition. So I'm very happy.
You've got a big smile when you talk about it.
I love my art with passion. 5 years ago, I decided to go to what I call 2D canvas. I'd worked as a fashion photographer in London and in my 20s and decided it was time to paint. And there was no going back. I started off having lessons, like probably some people do, or following your instinct feeling, and realised I could do that on my own, and then went to London, did lots and lots of art fairs, met lots of other artists and peers, which was lovely because it's about networking as well. And just more projects, took on more projects, and just did lots of themes, new themes of work, new series of work. There was always a motivation behind the work.
So you literally started painting 5 years ago?
Sure.
And since then you have achieved quite a few different things, haven't you? Talk to me about some of those.
Firstly, well, where do I begin? Probably I ended up with a piece of artwork in Manila, of all places. It was on a multinational screen in Manila in the Philippines, a piece called Candy. And this was a project, a digital project that was going on at the time. And I got selected for that. And I was, woohoo, this is like pretty awesome. Not every day do you land a piece, obviously, in the Philippines. And following on from that, all sorts. I had a piece, Care of Art Below at Hyde Park Corner, that was on the Tube. And that was a great feeling to be literally on London Underground and see your work as posters. So that was cool, that was really cool. And then recently flannels, that was in honour of the NHS, care of a company called W1 Curates. Flannels have been exhibiting amazing art, and one of my pieces was selected on 34 channels in London. So my husband and I went to see that, and incredible. It was just to see it filmed was really good.
It's almost been a gift knowing that there is a limit and knowing where that limit is.
Sure.
And you seem to have you are making the most of it.
Absolutely.
And you look so happy.
I am. I'm really happy, ever so happy.
But you've had a lot of support, right? Your family?
Lots and lots of support. My own family, obviously, my husband, my 3 children, incredible. And I must mention all the time my mother, my brother, and I have a twin sister.
Do you?
You got a twin sister? Yes.
I couldn't do twins. If I had a twin sister, I'd be like, I'd probably be envious. You're not envious of each other?
No. She's a documentary maker,
is
actually.
She?
Yes,
oh,
she
wow.
is. So she's in film, which is wonderful. And the family have been fantastic.
Next, a subject that's been making headlines throughout the coronavirus pandemic: domestic abuse incidents of all forms that have been on the rise. So awareness and support are more critical than ever. Samantha Billingham is a domestic abuse survivor and the founder of SODA, a charity which stands for Survivors of Domestic Abuse. She told me about her personal experience of abuse and her mission to help others.
When I first met him, it was in a local pub. He was very charming. I sat with him, he made me feel so comfortable. There were no signs whatsoever for me to think any different. I left the pub that evening with him to go on to another pub, and he just said all the right things, and he made me feel very special. 2 weeks later, I moved into his flat with him.
Wow, that was quite quick.
That was very quick, which I now know is a huge red flag.
Yeah.
These relationships move very, very quickly, whether it's getting married, getting engaged, having children. And again, when I moved in, there were no signs whatsoever. It was a subtle abuse. So it started with the power and control at the honeymoon period of the relationship. It started with isolation. So when everything was all new and exciting, he didn't want me to see my parents. So it's something as casual as, oh, don't go and see your mum tonight. And before I knew it, I was seeing my mum less and less. And whenever I phoned my mum or I did see my mum, there was always consequences for me to pay. So he would smash up my phone, he would verbally abuse me. I was a legal secretary, I was really bubbly, I was really happy at home. And then this man came into my life and I lost everything.
But how soon was it for him to behave in that way? Because you said you moved in within 2 weeks.
Yes, I moved in within 2 weeks. He was still very calm, very charming, very caring, very loving. And even at the beginning, with those sort of signs of isolation, there was no red flag. There was no reason for me. I wasn't scared of him at that point. I was still I thought I was in love with him. He locked me in the flat. He wouldn't let me out the flat.
Well, when did that happen then?
That was very, very soon.
So very soon?
Very soon.
So a couple of weeks you moved in?
Yes.
Your first sort of moment where he was not quite trying to isolate you,
yes,
keep you from your family, how long did that take? About?
Probably 2-3 months.
Okay.
Very, very quick. But because it's in the honeymoon, you don't see it as control. You think this person really loves you. You think they're genuine. You think they want to spend time with you. So when he said to me one morning, don't go to work, I was like, oh, I love my job. I was a legal secretary. It gave me freedom. He locked me in the flat. We lived on the 7th floor.
Wow.
He threw my mobile phone out of the window, so I couldn't phone into work. When I managed to get free, the first place I went was my workplace. I tried to explain what was happening behind closed doors, which was really difficult because you don't understand yourself at the time, because there were no visible signs, there was no physical violence at that time. It was once he'd got full control of me, that's when the physical abuse started. So when he first hit me, and we often hear people say, oh, if my partner ever hit me, I'd leave straight away. It doesn't work like that. He was so full of remorse. I remember looking at him and he was so sorry. He started to cry. He was very apologetic. So because at that moment, I still love him and I still want to be with him. And he's really, I'm still not frightened at this point because it's only just happened. So I think, oh, he really is sorry because he's crying and he's telling me so. So I stayed. It was really strange because he made me feel the way the others felt. So I think that's where it becomes really clouded, because I make you feel loved. For example, he would say, oh, don't go out with that friend tonight because they're jealous of what we've got. They're jealous of us being together. So you think, perhaps he's right. So you don't see that person, but you don't realise that they're actually isolating you from everyone. So when you do realise things aren't going quite right, you have no one to turn to.
What would you like to see change, and how can people get in touch with your organisation?
I would like to see domestic abuse awareness in education. I know a lot of people get frightened when we talk about domestic abuse, but we need to instil this in our young children and our young people. So I believe that education is key in the way forward. And I would love to see the justice system ripped up and kind of built again in favour of all victims and survivors of domestic abuse.
After the break, I'll share my experience as a mother when my child was born early. I'll speak to a mum whose 4 children were all born premature. Don't go anywhere.
You're the first in your family to go to university, so wherever challenges your childhood presented, it didn't stop you going to university. How did you find it?
Never felt like a student. I was always like a townie who was doing a degree and a little bit apprehensive about it. None of my friends really had gone to university. They're all trained as plumbers and electricians and that kind of thing. And it was completely not what I expected, a lot more down to earth, and I studied politics, so you can decide whether that was useful or not.
You say you played hard and you worked hard, you did your schoolwork too. You get into Oxford.
Yeah,
Wow.
I know. But I just was like a fish out of water, like, for most of it, to be honest. Although I did make some really good friends there.
Why were you a fish out of water?
State educated, northern girl doing science, and the work is really, really hard. It's completely different. What I realised was everybody else had a lot of coaching, a lot of extra tuition, a lot of support. There was no teaching, really. It's just like, here's an exercise book, get on with it. Crushed my confidence immediately, which, having gone from being this sort of clever, like, oh, you're out of 2,000 kids in this sixth form college in Manchester, we want you to sort of apply for, I was the only one who got in out of that, to basically being made to feel like I was totally thick, you know, is quite crushing.
Did your parents separate when you were young? Do you know your dad?
They separated when I was 10. My father left home for strangely with a woman round the corner. I have to say, it's probably it made things more difficult financially, but it also made me probably appreciate what I've actually had, what I then had in the future, so to speak. So.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage. I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back to Difficult Conversations with me, Nana Akua, on GB News. Each week on Saturday, my show, between 4 to 6, I sit down with someone who's not had the easiest of times in life and hear their story. Now, a man who had his own struggles with drink and drugs is now using his experience to support other people to change their lives. DJ and co-founder of Break Free, Lee Butler, shared his experience of addiction with me.
I wouldn't say I've got an addictive personality. I think lots of generations in that sort of dance era of the 90s were caught up in the ecstasy, the drug ecstasy, the lots of the new rave scene and acid scene that kicked in. And what started out as social use became abuse, which then became an addiction that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop. And it was taking everything off me, my family, my mental health, my job, my wealth, everything. And it was very, very, very difficult to stop.
Could you see yourself what was happening at the time, or were you just so obsessed with this particular addiction that you didn't notice these things were falling apart?
At the beginning, when it was use and it was social use, I think I was caught up in the moment of the social side of it and the music and the nightclubs and the whole scene. But then when I got older and I got to a point where I was married with kids and my use was getting worse, and it went from ecstasy to cocaine, and the pain that cocaine brought to me and my family was that point that I did know I needed to stop, which is when I reached out to plenty of different services at the time, from AA to CA to the 12 steps to Addiction. And I was in and out of service for 15 years. It was having a really horrendous effect on my family. It's 4.5 years now since I've had a drink or a drug, and I'm incredibly passionate about giving people hope that you can break free from your addiction. You really, really can. And the rewards, it's okay talking about the pain and the paranoia and the self-loathing and the horrendous places that addiction takes you to and what it takes off you. But it's also very important to talk about the incredible rewards that come in recovery and breaking free from your addiction, because when there's no hope in an addict, that's when it gets really, really, really difficult and dangerous, when someone feels like there is no hope for them.
Now you've managed to break through from your addiction, do you get pangs of temptation still?
No, I don't. Which is what we're doing at Break Free. It's a very sort of different technique and programme. We just launched our website, breakfreesupport.com, and our programme is nothing like the steps, for example. The steps is about accepting that you're powerless, accepting that you have an addiction for life, that you have a disease, and that you have to surrender to a higher spirit and take one day at a time, and you're always an addict in recovery. We completely disagree with that. I'm living proof that 4 years on, I never ever hear from my addiction. Our programme is all about learning to separate yourself from your addiction. So many people reach out and they're having arguments and battles every weekend. They want to get clean, they want to get free, but the weekend comes, it's Friday, the sun's out, work's finished, text off the girls, the sun's out, the match is on, there's a fight on the telly, and their addiction will start talking to them. I just have a few, don't go mad. It's okay, you're not in work till Monday, you've worked hard, or I've had an argument, or good news or bad news. And this part of you that's developed your addiction, it will speak to you. It will generate thoughts about using. And until you can recognise them, it's like I've always said, you can't win an argument unless you can recognise your opponent. And this technique really gives you an opponent to recognise. And the rewards from the people that are with us at the moment is sensational.
Now, last month was World Prematurity Day, a global movement to raise awareness of premature birth and sometimes devastating impact it can have on families. And for every 13 babies born in the UK, one baby is born premature. And I know this because my own son, Ivory, he was born at 28 weeks and 3 days, and he spent 12 weeks in intensive care. Now, each neonatal experience will affect families differently. I shared my experience with MARSHA Davies, who is the mother of 4 premature children.
My eldest, she was born only 4 weeks early, so it wasn't anything major, but she caught strep B meningitis whilst on the ward. So she was in intensive care for 3 weeks. Then I had Ben, who was 29 weeks, then followed by Reese, 27 weeks, and my daughter Elna at 25 weeks, which that was the most horrendous one of all. That was really touch and go.
Now, the thing is with premature babies, and the thing is that what they don't tell you, because you go and you do all the classes and everything, and nobody mentions that, oh, by the way, if it comes out a little bit early, then there's this whole section of the hospital that you may never have seen or never heard of before, and there's this whole experience that you may well have to go through. Nobody mentions any of that. After your first 3 who were premature, were you prepared for the 4th one that was premature? And was there any reason why the babies kept coming out slightly early?
No, there's different reasons every time, and mostly my uterus just ruptured. But I think you're right, definitely, in that there's no scope for anyone knowing that neonatal units exist. You don't know until you're actually there and you're thrown into the deep end. With my youngest, the hospital wouldn't actually even tolerate my pregnancy. They said, you're not going to make it, so there's no point in seeing you. And then when she was born at 25 weeks, I mean, I've been there 3 times before, and I think that, I know exactly how this is going to go. And it was a complete different ball game, whereas there's a difference when you've got a bit of hope, but I had no hope at all with the 25-week one. I thought, this is it, she's not going to survive. And I think as a parent, that's the most devastating thing you can ever go through. Watching your baby cling to life on life support, knowing there's nothing you can do. Your whole entire life is literally in the hands of the nurses and doctors.
They're quite, and the thing is, what people don't realise is those nurses and doctors are quite incredible, and they treat each of those babies like kings and queens. They literally do. And each one is, you wouldn't know that they weren't their children. And one of the things that really fascinated me was the fact that Ivory was so small, but yet he had he had cannulas, 2 in each arm, something in his leg, this, that and the other. I mean, there he was, all of that going on. He had this breathing thing on him, which stayed on him for about 6 or 7 weeks, and he still kept going. If this was me as an adult, I'd be like, oh, just finish me off, I've had enough of this. But they just kept going, and it's so amazing to see them when they actually, they're out there and they survive. What kind of support did you receive?
I think I felt like, the reason why I set up the charity in the first place was because I was sat by her incubator, nothing you can do, and I just found that I didn't feel like there was any support. The nurses were fantastic. They were my biggest support network. And other parents, you become best friends with these absolute strangers because you have something in common. But I didn't feel like there was enough support. And that's why I set the charity, because I thought, you know what, if I can just help one of the parent, and it snowballed out of necessity. And now we have this huge community where there's, thousands of women right now all over the country that have got the babies in neonatal units, and they all talk to each other online, so they can be sat by an incubator having the worst day of their life, and they'll put a little rant, or they'll say, ask for advice. Has anyone else gone through this? And, hundreds of other women will support them and pick them back up on their worst days. And I think that is the best thing for parents right now. If you need help, if you need support, just go and ask for it. It's out there. It's definitely out there.
Let's end the show by looking back at a hugely emotional conversation I had with Emma Brining. The tragic death of her partner Yanis Kotranis back in August this year also saved the lives of some very sick people after he became a multi-organ donor. Just weeks after his death, Emma joined me alongside Olive McGovern, the chief nurse of organ donation at NHS Blood and Transplant, to talk about her experience.
So I met Yanis when he was at work in a restaurant, and I was introduced to him, and I immediately was attracted to him, and we were put together obviously by a close friend, and we just were together after that straight away. He was adorable, he was a very generous man, very kind, very sacrificial, always put others before himself, didn't grumble, and a joy to be with. So yeah, he's the love of my life. You know, I was his princess. And so the quality of the relationship was so fantastic and so amazing that I didn't need to ever worry about anything, really. Yeah.
Mm. So you were with him for, how long were you with him?
I mean, two years, which doesn't sound that long, but I think, as I said, the quality of the relationship meant that it was just so deep and so holistic and healing for me. And I was very, very happy with him, and obviously we planned to be together for the rest of our lives.
Now, of course, he died, and it was quite a sudden thing.
It was
unexpected in so many ways. He wasn't ill, he wasn't sick. What happened?
So I had a phone call from him. He was at work in the morning, and it sounded like he was having a stroke. And I got there, and I wasn't sure then if he was having a stroke because he didn't have paralysis down one side of his face. The ambulance came, they didn't think he was having a stroke, but in fact he was having a hemorrhagic stroke, which doesn't always cause paralysis. And so he was taken to Watford General Hospital, and it was a catastrophic bleed. And so he was only given an hour to live, but he was given some medication. His eyes responded to light, and then he was blue lighted up to Queen's Square in London, to the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery, and they operated the same day to remove the blood clot on his brain, and then he went into surgical ICU.
And you were with him all this time?
I was with him for the next 5 days in ICU, and obviously he was intubated when he came into London. So it wasn't immediately apparent after the operation how successful it had been. It took a few days to work out whether he could respond or not. It became clear there didn't seem to be any response. And he was given an EEG to see if there's any electrical activity in the brain, and there weren't any seizures happening. And so the consultant advised that there should be brain stem death tests done. So I had a discussion. I said, I remember just blurting out, what about organ donation? I'd never thought about it myself. I'm ashamed to say I'd never given it a second thought. And once I raised the possibility, then all the protocols and pathways changed for Yanis and also for myself.
And at the time, obviously before you realised that he had passed away, were you able to speak to him at all? Did he say anything to you?
The last time I was able to speak to him when he was conscious was as he went into A&E at Watford General Hospital. I wasn't allowed to go into A&E with him. So he wanted me to come. He told the ambulance staff he wanted me to come. He was able to speak a little bit. And I just said, look, I'm going to be here, darling. I'm not going anywhere. I'll stay with you. That's the last time I spoke to him.
So they wouldn't let you go in? Was it because of COVID?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so sad that you didn't get to at least be there with him.
I saw him that night just before he went to theatre. So I was with him. And because he became an organ donor, it meant that he was in ICU for longer because of the time it took then to do tissue matches. So I then had this sort of miraculous time where I was with him for a couple of days, although he passed away, where I could just be with him, lie next to him, talk to him. And he was treated as if he was still there. So he loved the Bee Gees and ABBA. So the nurses put that music on quietly on an iPad next to him. So,
yeah. And of course, we do have some photos of you with him as well.
Yeah.
In ICU.
Yeah.
Sort of,
we do. And they were wonderful. I mean, they were so supportive and kind. So I had the ICU nurses team, and I had the organ donor nurse team as well. So there were two teams actually then sort of working alongside each other and supporting me.
Yeah. And because you had been with him, I mean, it is a long time really, 2 years to be with someone, especially if they are the one, and you know that, you do sort of know, don't you? And what about his family? Where were they?
We were trying to get hold of them desperately. Some of his family were in Greece. We couldn't. The consultant was trying to get hold of his UK family and left messages. So it ended up me being the only one who could consent to organ donation and go through all the paperwork and the questions. And I think that's really when I found it incredibly hard. The actual paperwork is quite substantial. It is a legal document. You have to sign it at the end of it. And it was the hardest, most painful thing I've ever done, because I found that I had this sort of battle with my emotions to hang on to him. And yet the logic of, well, of course it's rational that I should say yes to these questions. But I found that I was having to have a wave of grief, and then I had a sort of like period of cognition where I could like tackle another question, and then talk around the issues around a particular organ or particular piece of tissue, and then say yes to it, and then pause, and then so it took several hours to do, and I kind of lost track of time really as I was doing it.
I can imagine. So Olive, organ donation then, because you know your loved one has passed away, you've now got to think, oh, hang on, they're going to take bits out of their body, and they're going to be everywhere. And how do people get beyond that? And then what is the process once you've? Because Emma explained that there were a lot of forms. It was a legal document. It sounds really stressful, actually.
It can be a very difficult time for families because actually their loved one has just died on an intensive care unit. But actually what we do say to families is please make your donation decision, make your family aware of what your decision would be in the event of your death. These conversations happen at very upsetting times. So when families know what their loved one's donation decision is, it's easier for them to support that decision, and it's easier for them to honour their loved one's decision, just like Emma did. Organ donation can take a period of time, and the reason for that is we've got to make sure that organ transplantation is safe, and that we gather all of the medical and travel and social history in relation to the individual. It takes some time for organs to be matched and for us to actually bring in the potential organ recipients into hospital. So all of that can take a period of time. But actually there are benefits to that, because you can spend those last remaining hours with your loved one, like Emma has just described, that she got to spend the last precious couple of hours with Yanis. So it is really, really important to talk to your family and let them know your donation decision.
And it's obviously the process means that my grief has been more complex and still continues to be. When I got to the end of the paperwork, the nurses said to me, it's very rare that someone consents to everything. And I thought, well, I can see why, because you just don't have the cognitive space to process these questions. But the last question was, would you be happy if the families of the organ recipients or the organ recipient himself or herself contacted you? And I said, yes, definitely. And I'm really excited about the prospect of that happening. Yanis was able to save the lives of 3 people through his organ donation. And then through his soft tissue donation, his heart valves went to the Brompton. So those are still to be transplanted, I think, at the moment, because they can be kept for longer. Also his eyes as well. So I was stunned to learn that eyes can actually benefit up to 8 people, and that soft tissue can actually be kept for up to a year. Usually those transplants take place within 3 to 4 months after the soft tissue's been retrieved, which happens the following day after the organ retrieval. So again, I've still got that sort of information to come as to who, again, has benefited in that way. So I really hope that there's some contact in the future, and I can sort of tell them more about Yanis and obviously have another sort of chapter. And his part of him is out there somewhere. So that's an amazing, extraordinary thought, really, to consider.
Very brave, and to be so forward with it and forthcoming, especially after.
Well, Yanis is very much, gives me strength and the love that he gave me, and so it's really down to the sacrifice that he made. He did an enormous job. He was very heroic. And when actually the organ retrieval operation takes place, which happens at night time, they have a ceremony of honour to begin with, and so I wrote him a little letter which the nurse read out. And they also, again, played the Bee Gees all the way through it, apparently. And Manny, who was the lead surgeon from the Royal Free, he then put the Bee Gees onto his phone list. So Liza rang me, the nurse, at sort of 6:30 the next morning, told me it had gone. We got another kidney match during the operation, which was fantastic. She washed him, she put him in his shroud. And also because I'm next of kin to an organ donor, it means I've got support for life as well from the NHS. And in fact, they actually have a research programme with the University of Salford, Manchester to support organ donor families and see what the impact on them is long term. So there's a lot going on, and I would just say a little bit about research, because it's not just about consenting to organs and soft tissue, but if the organ or soft tissue isn't viable for some reason to be transplanted, you then have the option to say, can it go to research? Now, again, I've suddenly found I had all these questions about research and what that actually meant. Very small amounts of tissue. And then the impact for that, of course, is monumental. I mean, that could go on to save tens of thousands of lives in the future. So that's another question that one has to think about.
That's all for today. You can hear more difficult conversations with me in the new year, every Saturday between 4 to 6 p.m. Thank you for joining me this afternoon on GB News.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.